Morning, church. Well, been here a little over 16 years. I have never seen that many kids on the stage at one time. I haven't, seriously. That was just amazing. It was great. I remember one time we were right at 40, and there were more than 40 up. They were moving around a little bit, so it was kind of hard to count, but there was more than 40 who were up here. I want to begin a little series on the Beatitudes, and I've entitled this, Maintaining Your Sanity in an Insane World. You know, I don't know about you, but whatever happened to the concepts of things like common sense and common decency? As you look out at the world, you just got to scratch your head and wonder what's going through a lot of people's minds. Common sense. Several of our major cities now have decided that they're not going to prosecute shoplifting anymore if it's under a certain amount that's taken. The result is that in a city like San Francisco, Walgreens has shut down a number of their stores in San Francisco because they're being robbed blind. I was listening to a fellow the other day who owns a store in Austin, Texas. And he had phoned the police because a person was shoplifting stuff out of his store. And he was told when he called 911, he was asked, "Are you being physically assaulted at this point?" He said, "No." The response was, "Well, then there's nothing we can do." Whatever happened to common sense? Common decency? I am regularly offended anymore watching television with the commercials that come on. Because so many apparently who put these things together have decided that they are going to shove their immorality down my throat. And I don't appreciate it. At times it's flat out embarrassing, isn't it? Particularly if you're sitting with children or even in a mixed crowd, some of the stuff that they're putting out there in an attempt to sell their goods. And I don't know about you, but it really bothers me. I pull up to a stoplight, and there is no telling what's going to be on the back window of that vehicle in front of me or on the bumper. But people are sticking stuff on there that is not decent. And it shouldn't be out there in public. Whatever happened in this crazy world to common sense and common decency? I believe in many ways we really do live in a world that has gone insane. And I hate that. I'm not happy about it at all, but it just seems like in many ways this country's lost its mind. So, how do we stay sane or seek to regain our sanity in a world that in many ways seems so insane? I believe that one of the best sources of sane thinking rests in God's Word. For example, I believe what Jesus teaches in the Sermon on the Mount is eminently sane. It is common sense. It pushes common decency and common courtesy and all these kinds of things that we used to speak of as common, but they're not anymore. The Sermon on the Mount is considered by many to be countercultural, and it is. And to be controversial, and it is. But only because it flies in the face of so much immorality and insanity that exists in the world today. In fact, I think it's because it's rooted in reality and because it's filled with common sense that so many find it controversial. So this morning, I want us to begin to look at the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, what we call the Beatitudes. And let's start in our search for sanity where Jesus does, and that's by discussing, first of all, attitude. Matthew 5, verse 3. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And I want to reword that a little bit, and that's what I put up there. I really believe that what Jesus is saying here is, spiritually, and in a lot of other ways, to win, you first got to admit that you can lose. I want you to think about that. One of the worst epithets today that you can throw at anybody is what? Loser, right? I mean, that's horrible. This whole concept of losing is something that, boy, people just can't stand, won't deal with. We're obsessed with avoiding any admission of failure. Grades and sports are increasingly politically incorrect, okay? We shouldn't have grades. No A, B, C, D, F anymore. No. Pass, fail. Or something along that line, okay? Because we don't want people to feel like they're not performing up to a certain level that would be the equivalent of an A or a B or a C or a D or an F. Competitive sports. Now what do? Well, we have a big tournament, but everybody gets what? They get a competition trophy, right? All right, a participation trophy. So nobody loses. Thing is, in a situation like that, when nobody loses, nobody wins. You know, think about it. No fault has moved from automobile insurance to a way of life in a very real sense. I don't remember when it was. It's been some time ago, but I can remember when no-fault divorce became legal. And now you don't have to give any reason why you're divorcing her, why you're tearing the sheet with him. You just can do it because technically it's nobody's fault. Obviously it is, okay? But we call it no-fault divorce. How are our children ever going to learn to cope with losing? And that's a really, really important thing, folks. I was reading the other day about a university that was hiring one English professor. And they had 60 candidates who all had qualifications necessary to fill that position. 60 candidates for one teaching position. Now that means that 59 people heard what? They didn't get the job. One person out of 60 got the job. We live in an increasingly competitive society in many ways. I mean, the fact of the matter is that if you apply for a job, as qualified as you may be, there are a lot of people that may be just as qualified or more than you, and you may get the job, but you may not. The fact of the matter is that if you can't cope with losing, you're just going to curl up in a ball, aren't you? And quit looking and live in the basement, like unfortunately a lot of people are today. It's very, very important that we learn you don't always win. But that doesn't mean you stop. That doesn't mean you're a loser. You keep on. It just means that losing really is simply a part of life. And it is. This obsession with never admitting failure has made Americans a happier and more balanced people, right? Ooh. Is it coincidental that suicide rates are at an all-time high? That depression is a horrific problem? That drug abuse has reached unheard of levels? So, why do we buy into this idea that I can't lose, that nobody should lose, that you shouldn't have to deal with that we can make up all kinds of excuses and things of that nature. Open your songbooks. Look at page 324 in your songbooks. The title of that song is what? Alas, and did my Savior bleed, right? First verse. Alas, and did my Savior bleed, and did my sovereign die? Would he devote his sacred head for such a one? You know what that read when I was a kid? Worm. Ooh. Why, man, that's an abject admission of spiritual failure, isn't it? To speak of ourselves as a worm. Why, we can't do that. We've got to cut that offensive word out of that song. Man, we've got to change it. Because in our politically correct culture, such language is considered insulting. Me, a worm? Man, that says I'm a loser. Maybe I am. When it comes to our spiritual needs, in many ways, are we really any more sane about this than the world? When we start letting the world dictate to us words in our songs, because that word, which in many ways reflects where we're at spiritually, and it's absolutely true, some are going to find perhaps offensive because it smacks too much of reality. Remember what Jesus said years ago about the self-deceit of the Laodicean Christians? This is in Revelation 3, verse 17. You say, I'm rich. I've acquired wealth and don't need a thing. Listen to him, but you don't realize that you're wretched and pitiful and poor and blind, naked. Ooh. Now, let's listen to Jesus. Blessed are the poverty-stricken in spirit. Literally, that's what he says. When he says poor in spirit, it's kind of hard in English to translate that word tokos into English. Maybe, perhaps a better translation in our vernacular might be dirt poor. And when you talk about dirt poor, what are you talking about? Dirt poor simply means these people are so poor they can't even put a wood floor down in their house or a concrete floor. They just have a dirt floor. They are dirt poor. That's the thrust of the word that Jesus uses here. Okay, it's not just, yeah, you're a little short on cash this week. These are people who are in dire poverty. They've got nothing. Blessed are you when you are poverty-stricken in spirit. Why? Well, maybe because worm really does say it better than one. Maybe that's more honest, more realistic than one. Maybe we've run from reality too often, dealing with our spiritual condition. What is reality? Romans 3, verse 10. There is no one righteous. No, not even one. Ooh. None? Zero? That's what he says. Romans 3:23. For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Well, I'm a good guy. The vast majority of the time, I don't do anything bad. That's not what we're talking about. All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. 1 John 1, verse 8. If we claim to be without sin, we deceive ourselves. And the truth is not in us. You're kidding yourself. If you walk along thinking, well, I'm good enough to get by. No, you're not. None of us are. That's the reality. In our most sane and sober moments, I think, we tremble at the truth of those statements. They make us uncomfortable. They make me uncomfortable. I don't like that. But I've got to admit and recognize that that's absolutely true. Question. When do most of us seek help? I would argue it's when we have no other choice. That's when we seek help. When we've pursued all the alternatives that we can pursue on our own, that's when we finally decide, maybe I better get some help. Guys, how lost do we have to be before we'll ask directions? Huh? After the wife, for the 27th time, have said, would you stop and ask? And finally, boy, I've got this really, maybe you've heard this. I found this week. This is such a cool quote. This is from Daniel Boone. Listen to him. Now, I love this. I have never been lost, but I was once bewildered for 3 days. Is that not great? I've been bewildered on a number of occasions, okay? How troubled must our marriage be before we seek counsel? Ask Steve. Counseling I've done over the years, I'll tell you when couples come for counseling when they're about to tear the sheet, when it's just about over, when they've pretty well ruined their relationship. There's not much hope left. That's finally when they'll come ask for help. And way too often, it's probably too late. And that relationship is dead and buried. They just haven't had the funeral yet. That's the divorce. But they're right there. How does an insane world deal with the problem of sin? Well, we can ignore it, act like it's not there, turn a blind eye to it. And again, when you're surrounded by it, after a while, that kind of becomes the easiest thing to do. Just kind of shut it off and close it away. Doesn't deal with it, doesn't solve it, but kind of how we cope. We can rename it. It's not adultery anymore, is it? It's an affair. An affair. That sounds so much not near as harmful and heartbreaking as adultery. We don't speak of sodomy anymore. You never hear that term. That's outlawed. Can't use that. I just did, but you're not supposed to. And we substitute same sex for that because that's less offensive, you see. And so we take things and we constantly work at, the culture does it, at renaming them. Or we deny it. Man, I've fascinated politicians who can just look you right in the eye and lie. Well, now you took this position 2 years ago. This is what you said. And it's recorded. I didn't say that. Right there, you said, no, I didn't say that. And it happens all the time, doesn't it? You just deny, and if you deny long enough, it's like it never happened, even though it did. Well, we'll just deny reality, and then it's not real anymore. Well, yeah, it is. Or we can excuse it. Well, those people that are shoplifting, they just don't have the money to buy those goods, and it's not their fault they don't have the money to buy those goods. It's our culture that's oppressed them and brought all this about. And so why should we prosecute them when they're just trying to get things that they may need? And we can just go on and on and on, can't we? Excusing wrongdoing. But none of these solutions, and I put that in quotes for a reason, grapple with the problem of sin or secure a real answer to sin. The poor in spirit are sane enough to recognize that there are some things that they can't fix. That's why they're blessed. Makarios. Can also translate even happy. Blessed are the poverty-stricken in spirit. Why? Because they're honest enough to recognize that there are some things that they can't fix. They can't ignore, excuse, deny, whatever. The poor in spirit realize that they're broken. That's a tough thing to admit. I'm broke. I'm broke. And I'm not talking about money. I'm talking about broke spiritually. They've made a mess. And one time or another, who hasn't made a mess in our lives? There's no way that they can fix things on their own. This is humbling, folks. But it's also the key to freedom. Because you see, it's when you are poor in spirit that you open the door to the kingdom of heaven. Because you open the door to the Lord. And you're willing to admit, I can't do it on my own. I've got to have help. Jesus, notice, promises no reward either to the self-sufficient or to the self-deluded. It's not blessed are those who ignore their sin, blessed are those who deny their sin. Blessed are those who are poor in spirit. Theirs is the kingdom of heaven. You see, the self-sufficient and the self-deluded both refuse to face reality. As so many do today, they find it more comforting to redefine reality, to ignore reality, to reshape reality than to face reality. The poor in spirit will face reality. Brothers and sisters, God promised His kingdom to losers. Not self-proclaimed winners, not excuse makers, not victims. Losers. Who recognize that in the battle with sin, we lost. And we can't fix it ourselves. We have got to have divine help. You see, the spiritually sane understand that in order to win, you got to be first willing to admit that you can lose. That song, Rock of Ages, beautifully expresses this truth. Nothing in my hand I bring, simply to the cross I cling. And that's right. That's where we all are. And that's humbling, but it's right. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Theirs is the kingdom of heaven. If you're ready this morning to admit that you need divine help to deal with the problem of sin in your life, that you can't do it on your own and by yourself, if you're willing to express your belief in Jesus Christ as the Son of God, confess His name and put on your Lord in baptism, blessed are the poor in spirit. For you just open the door to the kingdom of heaven, because Jesus Christ will open that door for you. If we can help you in any way, we encourage you to come when we stand and when we sing.